The closer you got, the more their nervous system treated you like a threat. Not because you were threatening, because you were succeeding. Something trained into them before they could speak reads incoming love not as safety, but as the signal right before losing yourself completely. For the person who disappeared on you, your love landing was the alarm. And by the time they knew what they were doing, they had already pulled away. Take a slow breath. We have time. This is not a story about what they did wrong or what you should have done differently. This is about what was already happening inside a nervous system. Theirs, and in some small way, possibly yours, long before the two of you met. A pattern that explains the disappearing. That explains the silence that arrived sometimes, right after the week where everything finally felt right. There is a finding, somewhere past the middle of tonight's story, that quietly reframes what that disappearance meant. About them, about you, about what love was actually doing to both of you. So let the light in the room go down. Let your phone be somewhere else. None of this began with you. None of this began with them. It began earlier. Much earlier and much smaller than either of you. For most of your life, you have probably held a certain story about people who pull away. The story goes something like this. They are not ready. They are not capable. They are damaged. They do not love you enough. They have not met the right person. Or, if you have been particularly generous, they are afraid of intimacy in some vague, cinematic, unhelpful way that never quite explains what is actually happening. And none of those stories is entirely wrong. But every one of them misses the mechanism. The mechanism is this. Inside a certain kind of person, the felt experience of being loved does not register as reward. It registers as pressure. Not pressure they can name, not pressure they are pretending to feel. Pressure their body begins producing in response to you, reliably. Every single time you get close enough for the love to actually land. And because the pressure is unbearable, they move away from the source, which is you. The part that breaks most people, the part that keeps you awake at night, possibly for years afterward, is that the moments when you felt closest to them are statistically the moments just before they disappeared. The dinner where it all clicked. The trip where they told you something they had never told anyone. The night you said the thing, and they said it back, and you fell asleep sure that this one was different. That is when the alarm went off inside them. Not afterward. Not because of something you said or did the next morning. That moment, the one where you felt safest with them, was, physiologically, the moment they were least safe with you. Because something in their body was reading the warmth on your face, the openness in your voice, the relaxation in their own chest, and interpreting all of it as the early stages of engulfment, of erasure, of disappearing into someone else the way, long ago, a much younger version of them had to disappear in order to survive. And their nervous system, trained to protect them from exactly that, began doing what it has always done. It began pulling them away from the light. To understand what was happening inside them, you have to go back to something infants did in a laboratory more than 50 years ago. In 1970, a psychologist named Mary Ainsworth designed an experiment that would reshape the entire field of psychology. She called it the strange situation. The design was simple. A mother and her toddler entered a small room with toys. The mother sat. The child explored. A stranger came in. Then the mother left. Then she came back. What Ainsworth wanted to see was what the children did at reunion. Most of the children she studied did what you would expect. They were upset when their mother left. They greeted her when she returned. They were soothed, usually quickly. Ainsworth called them securely attached. But there was a second group. These children did not cling during separation. They did not seem especially distressed, and at reunion, they often turned their bodies away. They continued playing with the toys. They appeared, to any casual observer, perfectly fine. Ainsworth called these children avoidant, and for a while the assumption, even among some of her colleagues, was that these children simply cared less, that something in them had either learned not to need or had never needed in the first place, that they were emotionally independent in a way the rest of us were not. Then, in 1977, researchers did something that changed everything. They hooked the children up to heart rate monitors. What they found was this: the avoidant children, the ones who appeared unbothered, who did not cry at separation, who turned away at reunion, had heart rates identical to the distressed infants. In some studies, even higher. Elevated from the moment their mother left, elevated through the reunion, elevated long after the distressed children had calmed down. They were not unbothered. They were holding it in. At 12 months old. Let that sit for a moment. A 1-year-old, too young to speak full sentences, had already learned to produce the outward appearance of calm while their body was screaming. Had already learned that turning toward the person they needed would not give them what they needed. Had already made, though they would have had no words for it, a permanent physiological decision about what love was going to cost them. That decision did not get unmade when they grew up. It got more sophisticated. The decision those infants made was what attachment researchers now call a deactivating strategy. That term is doing a lot of work. Let's slow it down. In any nervous system, the attachment system, the wiring that makes humans reach for each other when they are scared or sad or in pain, is designed to be activated, and then, once comfort arrives, to quiet down. You feel scared. You reach for someone. They respond. Your body calms. That is the entire arc of secure attachment in a single cycle, repeated thousands of times across a childhood. But for some of us, the second half of that cycle never reliably happened. You reached. Nobody came. Or the person who came with irritation, or with distance, or with a subtle message that your reaching for them was, somehow, too much. And a nervous system can only run that failed cycle so many times before it does something quite brilliant and quite costly. It turns off the first half. It learns not to reach. This is not suppression in the sense of pretending. It is suppression at the level of physiology. The nervous system learns over thousands of repetitions that activating attachment behavior does not bring safety. It brings more pain. And so it begins shutting down the attachment behavior before it can fully activate. It dampens the longing before the longing reaches consciousness. It muffles the need before it becomes a reach. And the research on this is remarkable. In 1997, 2 psychologists named Chris Fraley and Philip Shaver asked adults with dismissive avoidant attachment to think about an unwanted relationship breakup and then actively suppress those thoughts. What they found surprised many of their colleagues. The avoidant adults were not just performing calmness. Their physiological arousal, measured by skin conductance, actually dropped during the suppression. The thoughts were genuinely quieted, not buried, not stored for later. Muted in the moment, at the level of the body, which is a kind of neurological magic trick, unless you look closer. Because in subsequent studies, Mikulinsa, Dolev, and Shaver added one small variable that changed everything. A finding I want to hold for the second half of tonight, because it is the piece that reframes what that early-stage magic actually costs the person performing it. For now, know only this: the trick works. until it doesn't. And the moments when it breaks down are precisely the moments when someone needs the trick the most. The pattern you watched, the one that disappeared on you, did not begin with you. It did not begin with the last person they dated. It began decades earlier with a specific small lesson learned by a specific small child. And here is what that early training actually builds: a brain that will, for the rest of its life, read incoming love as a warning sign. The caregivers of avoidant children are not usually malicious. Often, they are themselves products of the same pattern. What they share across vastly different cultures, homes, and economic situations is a consistent, usually unconscious, response to the child's emotional bids. When the child cried, the caregiver did not come, or came irritated. When the child reached, the caregiver stepped back, or redirected the child toward self-soothing, or explicitly asked the child to stop being so much. Sometimes the child was praised for being independent. Sometimes the child was shamed for being needy. Sometimes the child was simply met with a kind of flat, emotional unavailability. A parent who was physically present and emotionally 3 rooms away. And across all of those patterns, the child arrived at the same conclusion. If I want them near me, I cannot need them the way I need them. This is the rule being written into the person you eventually dated. Not a thought they ever had. Not a choice they remember making. A rule, installed before language, that their nervous system would go on enforcing for the rest of their life, whether they wanted it to or not. This is an almost impossible bind. Children are biologically built to seek their caregivers. That is not a choice. It is coded into the architecture of their nervous system with the same durability as heart rate or breath. So what the avoidant child does, what they must do to maintain proximity without being rejected, is build an entire second system. A cognitive and emotional layer that sits on top of the original attachment system and mutes it before it can express itself. They learn to self-soothe. They learn to appear composed. They learn that showing sadness or fear or hurt leads to distance, and that hiding those things keeps the caregiver close, or at least keeps them from being pushed further away. They learn that love, as they have it, is only accessible on the condition of not needing it too much. And if you dated this person as an adult, you met the finished product of that lesson. You met someone who could be warm, but not too warm. Interested, but not too available. Present, but never quite reachable at the deepest level. You did not know, because nobody told you, that the version of them you were dating had been trained across a childhood to function in exactly this way, and that the training was so old, so deep, so automatic, that it would hold even when they genuinely wanted it not to. And then, after enough years of this, a terrible second thing happens. The muting becomes automatic. It stops being a conscious choice. It stops even being available to consciousness. The child grows into an adult who has, quite literally, no reliable access to their own attachment feelings. Not because those feelings are not there. Research consistently shows they are there, measurable in cortisol levels, in heart rate, in brain activity, in stress hormones. But because the pathway from those feelings up into conscious experience has been disconnected, almost surgically, across a million tiny moments in early life. When you ask an avoidant adult how they feel, and they say fine, they are not necessarily lying. Many of them genuinely do not know. In large-scale studies by Mario Mikulincha and Philip Shaver, the 2 psychologists who have most systematically mapped adult attachment over the past 3 decades, avoidant adults consistently show a specific signature: low conscious distress, low self-reported need. And underneath that, physiological and cognitive evidence of a nervous system working extremely hard to keep a door shut, a door that, in most people, simply does not exist. Which brings us back to you, and to what happened the night they disappeared. You have to imagine, for a moment, what it is like to live inside a system like that. You meet someone. They are kind. They are interested in you. In the early stages, the phase attachment researchers call the pre-commitment phase, before the system has fully activated, you genuinely enjoy this. You are charming. You are present. You feel something that approximates wanting them, without feeling the weight of wanting them, because the wanting has not yet been given permission to fully arrive. Weeks pass, then months, and then, at some point, sometimes very predictably, often around the moment of first real vulnerability, something crosses a line. The person on the other side of the dinner table becomes real. Their face becomes the face that would hurt you if it went away. Their voice becomes a voice you would miss. And something in your body, which had been dormant since you were small, begins to stir. For a secure person, this would be welcome. It would be the feeling of falling in love. For an avoidant person, it is almost indistinguishable from panic, because the very first lesson their body ever learned was that needing someone like this is dangerous, that being this exposed to someone's face, someone's mood, someone's capacity to leave ends one way, badly, that the only way to survive the feeling currently rising in their chest is to turn it off. And they can turn it off. They have been turning it off since before they could walk. So what you experienced as an inexplicable cold snap in week 8, or month 3, or whenever it happened, the sudden distance, the short replies, the excuses for not seeing you, the strange flatness in their voice, that was not a decision made with you in mind. Their nervous system was running a 2-decade-old subroutine, a subroutine that, for them, felt something like this. I cannot breathe. I do not know why. I just need space. I just need to think. I need to take care of myself. I need to not be this available right now. And then, because the pattern is not consciously accessible to them, they retroactively generated reasons. You were too much. They needed to focus on work. They were not ready. You wanted more than they could give. None of those reasons are the reason. The reason is that your love was landing, and their system, which had been calibrated in infancy, registered the landing as overwhelm. Here is what makes this so specifically painful for the person on the other side of it. You were not imagining the closeness. That is the part that has probably kept you up the most. You look back at the week before they went cold, and you remember it was real. You remember their face. You remember the conversation at 3 in the morning where they told you about their grandfather. You remember the way they held you at the airport. You remember thinking, and now doubting, now wondering if you invented it. This is someone who sees me. You did not invent it. That was real, which is why it was unbearable to them. The intensity you read as closeness was, to them, the rising hum of a system that was about to flood. The vulnerability you read as progress was, to them, an invitation to drown. The feeling of being seen, which for you was the thing you had been waiting for, was for them the thing their entire body had been trained to avoid. And this is why the pattern is so specifically cruel for the person being left. It is not that your partner disappeared because they never cared. It is that they disappeared because they did. Because you had succeeded. Because the relationship, by every meaningful metric, was working. Which is why the system shut the relationship off. If you are hearing this now, and something in your chest is sliding into recognition, the long exhale of, "Oh, that is what happened to me," then this is the part of tonight's story that matters most. You were not crazy. You were not too much. You were not reading the connection wrong. You were reading it exactly right. And what you lost was not a person who never loved you. What you lost was a person whose nervous system could not let them love you without triggering a survival response so old they had never learned how to override it. That is not a comfort entirely, but it is the truth. And now, the finding I have been holding since the first section. In the years following Fraley and Shaver's original suppression study, attachment researchers returned to the question with one small variable added. And what they found changed the entire picture of what avoidant people are actually experiencing inside. They found that the suppression works, but only under certain conditions. Specifically, it works when the brain has enough available bandwidth to maintain it. In the 1997 study, avoidant adults suppressing thoughts about a breakup showed genuinely lower physiological arousal. The defense was functional. The trick was real. But in 2004, Mikulinsa, Dolev, and Shaver repeated those experiments under a cognitive load, asking avoidant participants to suppress those same thoughts while simultaneously holding a 7-digit number in their heads. And something quite different happened. The defenses collapsed. The suppressed thoughts came rushing back. The physiological arousal spiked. The negative memories that had been so successfully quieted a moment earlier became suddenly, painfully, intensely present, which means the calm was never actually the absence of the feeling. The calm was an active process, and the active process requires energy, attention, cognitive resources, a quiet enough internal environment to keep the door shut. Let me say this plainly, because it reframes everything. The avoidant person who left you did not leave because they felt nothing. They left because they could only maintain the absence of feeling under light load. And when the load got heavy, when the intimacy got real, when the implications of your relationship started becoming visible, when the future you were building with them started to feel like something they would have to actually live inside, the bandwidth required to keep suppressing the feeling exceeded what they had available. So the system did the only thing it knew how to do. It removed the source of the demand, which was you. Which means everything you just heard looks different now. The disappearance you could not make sense of. The sudden cold in week 8, the short replies, the vanishing, was never indifference. Their defense system had reached the limit of what it could hold. The feeling had grown loud enough that only physical distance could quiet it back down. Take a slow breath. Sit with that for a moment. Because the person who seemed least affected is, in many cases, the person who was most affected, and least able, biologically, to let themselves know. If you have ever watched a documentary about a couple's conflict, or, more likely, lived inside one, you know the moment. One person leans in, voice rising, trying to make themselves heard. The other person goes flat. Eyes slightly unfocused, shoulders dropping, the face becoming a kind of mask. The leaning in person interprets this as stonewalling, as coldness, as the final proof that the other person has stopped caring. John Gottman, who has spent more than 4 decades watching couples in his Seattle laboratory, studied this moment more closely than almost anyone alive. He found that in the overwhelming majority of cases where one partner appeared to be stonewalling, where they had gone flat, gone silent, become a wall, that person's heart rate was above 100 beats per minute. Their stress hormones were elevated. Their entire autonomic nervous system was in full fight or flight arousal. The person who looked checked out was physiologically flooded. They looked indifferent. Their bodies said otherwise. And the only tool their body knew for a crisis of that kind was to shut down the outward expression of it, which is precisely the tool their partner experienced as abandonment. Roughly 1 in 4 adults in the general population has a primary attachment pattern of this kind. That is not a small number. National survey data from the National Comorbidity Survey replication in the United States and from replicated samples across Europe and East Asia puts the figure somewhere between 22 and 25% of the adult population. That is not every cold person you have ever dated. That is not every complicated man in your life. That is a specific, measurable, neurobiologically grounded pattern present in roughly a quarter of the people you will ever be close to, which means the person who did this to you is statistically common. And also, and this matters, so is the person inside you, if you have ever done some version of this yourself. Because one of the quiet truths of attachment research is that most of us contain more than one pattern at different times. You may have been the anxious one in that relationship, and you may have been the avoidant one in a relationship before it. You may go cold under certain kinds of pressure. You may go flat when a partner's need for you grows larger than what feels manageable. You may have walked away from someone, once, in a way that in hindsight you still cannot quite explain to yourself. This is not a video about them versus you. It is a video about a pattern, and about the particular kind of pain it produces for everyone who touches it on either side. If you have recognized yourself in any of what you have heard tonight, not just in the person who left, but in a version of yourself from years ago, in some small corner of how you handle being loved now, this is the part of the story that is quietly for you. Because the pattern we are describing is not a separate species of person. It is a strategy of self-protection that lives to varying degrees in a quarter of the adult population, and in smaller doses in many of the rest of us. You may have felt the pull of it. You may have had a partner reach for you in a moment when you had been reaching too, and felt something in your chest quietly close the door. You may have told yourself afterward that you just needed space, that you just needed time, that you would come back to them when you felt more like yourself, even as, at some level, you knew that the feeling of not being yourself was the proximity of the other person's love. If that has ever been you, the research is also, in some ways, for you. What it says is this: the system running inside you is not evidence of a broken character. It is the intelligent solution that a very young version of you arrived at, when the tools available at the time were insufficient for the pain that was actually happening. That solution has kept you functional. It has kept you able to work and make friends and seem fine at family dinners and appear competent to people who have no idea what it costs you to be this composed. That is a real achievement. It is not something to be ashamed of. It is, however, a solution with a cost the research has now measured. Because the same wall that keeps the love from getting in is also the wall that keeps the grief from getting out. That is the particular, specific loneliness of this pattern, not the loneliness of people who have never had love offered to them, but the loneliness of a nervous system that has not yet figured out how to let love past the door. When avoidant adults are asked, in carefully designed studies, whether they feel lonely, they consistently underreport it. When their physiological stress markers are measured, those markers tell a different story. The loneliness is present. It is just not consciously available. If any of this lands, you are not alone either. And you are also, in your own way, being described by the research. In 2012, a team of researchers at UCLA led by Nathan DeWall did something that most people who have loved an avoidant have at some point wished they could do. They put avoidant people in a brain scanner during an experience of social rejection. Specifically, they used a simple online ball-tossing game called Cyberball, in which the participants are gradually excluded by the other players. For secure and anxious people, being excluded lit up two specific regions of the brain. the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, and the anterior insula. These are the same regions that activate when you stub your toe or burn your finger. For most people, social rejection registers neurologically as a kind of physical pain. It hurts because the brain cannot fully distinguish between losing a bond and injuring a body. The avoidant participants showed decreased activity in those regions. Not comparable to the others. Not even close. Significantly less reactive than either the secure or the anxious participants, as if the pain of rejection at the level of the brain was being actively dampened. Which is extraordinary. It means their nervous system was not just failing to generate the pain response of exclusion, it was, in effect, generating the opposite. A kind of neural mute button deployed in real time on the circuitry that would otherwise register this hurts. So when you ask yourself, in the weeks after they vanished, how it was possible for them to seem so unaffected, how they posted casually on social media 3 days later, how they looked fine at the coffee shop on the corner, how they seemed to be moving on at a speed that felt insulting, the answer is partly in DeWall's fMRI data. Their brain was doing exactly what it had been trained to do. Not feeling it, not on the surface, not yet. What it costs them, though, is the part most people never get to see. Because if you close the book there, on the brain scans, on the successful suppression, on the physiological calm that the avoidant defense is capable of producing, you would think the avoidant person has solved the problem of love by simply opting out of the pain of it. They have not. The research is clear on this. Longitudinal studies by Barant, Mikulinsa, and Florian, tracking avoidant adults over years, under increasingly heavy life stresses, show a specific and reliable pattern. Under light or moderate stress, the deactivating strategies function. The avoidant person looks, and by many measures is, relatively well regulated. But under chronic stress, under major life events, under sustained demand on their cognitive and emotional resources, the defenses collapse. And when they collapse, the distress that comes through is not equivalent to the distress of an anxious person. It is worse. A 2008 longitudinal study by Barant, Mikulinsa, and Shaver of mothers raising children with severe congenital heart disease found that avoidance in the mother, not anxiety but avoidance, was the stronger predictor of deteriorated mental health 1 and 7 years later. Studies of couples living in chronic security threats found the same pattern. Under sustained load, the people who had looked calmest became the sickest, because the feeling they had been outrunning for all those years was still there, held at bay, but not metabolized, stored, not resolved. And when the storage system finally gave way, because grief got too large, because a loss landed too squarely, because the accumulated suppression of decades finally asked for more than the system could produce, the wave that came through was the wave of everything that had not been felt in its own time. Avoidant adults have, on average, more physical health problems than secure adults, more chronic pain, higher rates of headaches, gastrointestinal issues, and somatic complaints. The body, in the end, trying to express what the mind has made inaccessible. They are more likely to use alcohol and avoidance-based coping. They are less likely to seek help when they need it. They are less likely even to know they need it. The person who left you is not, in any meaningful sense, living a freer life than you are. They are living a quieter one. And the cost of the quiet is that the grief they did not let themselves feel, during your relationship or after it, is doing its work inside them on a timeline they cannot control. You were not wrong to imagine them as carefree in the immediate aftermath. Their brain genuinely did do that for them, for a while, but the body keeps the score in a longer, slower handwriting. And on some Tuesday night you will never see, in some apartment somewhere, 10 years from now, 20, that score will come due. None of this means you were supposed to wait. It does not mean you should call them. It does not mean they will figure it out in time to come back, or that the relationship you were in could have worked if only you had loved them the right way. These patterns can change. Researchers have documented it, a phenomenon called earned security, the emergence of a secure attachment pattern in adults who did not begin with one. Roughly a fifth of currently securely attached adults arrived there after a childhood that did not start them off that way. But earned security, when it happens on the far side of pain the person has finally agreed to face. The partner does not get to supply that pain. Only the person's own life, eventually, can. Which means the partner who stays inside the disappearing, trying to love harder, trying to be more patient, trying to be the one who finally makes them feel safe, is not an agent of healing. That partner is usually the raw material the avoidant system consumes to postpone its reckoning. You were never going to be the one to fix this. Not because you were not good enough, because of how the architecture was built. And your staying, your reaching, your clarity, none of those things were going to override a pattern that has survived decades of the avoidant person's own resolutions to do differently. So what do you do with this tonight? You let it revise the story a little. The story in which you were not enough? That story was never true. The mechanism that ended your relationship was already in place before the two of you met. It was triggered specifically by your love succeeding. Which means the arc of your relationship, read through this lens, does not describe your failure. It describes something working well enough to trigger their shutdown. You were not the problem. You were, in the most technical and specific sense, the catalyst for a system doing exactly what it was trained to do. That does not undo the loss. Nothing does. The relationship is still over. The person is still gone. The nights you spent rereading the last messages, trying to figure out what you had done, happened. Those do not unhappen because you understand the mechanism. But something does shift. The story you tell yourself about what you are after this can include the truth of what happened. Not the cinematic version where you were too much, or not enough, or wrong in some particular way you have been trying to identify for months. The actual version, where a person whose nervous system could not let them stay, did not stay. And you, whose nervous system was built differently, felt the loss fully. Because you could. Because your system, for all its own patterns, was working. Your grief, in other words, was not proof that you had overvalued something that did not deserve it. Your grief was proof that something in you was operational. And the part of you that reached. The part of you that loved them openly. The part of you that, even now, wishes they had been able to stay. That part of you is not broken. That part of you is the evidence that you know how to love a person who can let themselves be loved back. There is a moment that will arrive, possibly not tonight, possibly months from now. It is the moment you realize you have stopped rereading the last messages. You will be walking somewhere, or cooking something, or closing a book, and you will notice that the place in your chest that used to ache every time their name came up has gone quiet. Not because you have stopped caring, not because you have decided you were wrong to love them, but because somewhere along the way, you stopped needing to solve the question of why they left. You already know why. It was not because you were too much. It was because you were enough. And their nervous system, trained long before you arrived, could not let them stay for that. If tonight has helped even a little, if the shape of what happened feels slightly more lit, and you would like to come back to these stories, you can subscribe to this channel, and we will keep meeting here in the quiet. For now, The room is dark. Your breath is slowing. Somewhere, in a life that is no longer yours to manage, someone you once loved is also alive, also breathing, also sleeping, also carrying things they may never fully let themselves carry. That is their story now, and yours in this exact moment is only this: the weight of your own body against the bed. The small, steady drum of a heart that knew how to stay open, and the soft, dim light of a mind that has, at last, found somewhere to rest.